Super simple build. Hello guys, welcome to the PiG Daily, episode number 70. And today we're talking about why is the 111 so powerful in Korea. If you're not familiar with the 111, the 111 was a really famous build back in Wings of Liberty, which Puma famously abused. You get one factory, one starport, one barracks, one factory, one starport, and then you basically would just build tanks, banshees, and marines, and you'd go and kill your opponent. And Protoss players just could not defend their expansion against this. There was like a point in the meta where Protoss were just staying on one base and like building Phoenix and trying to counterattack because they just could not engage this kind of complex set of units that just all complemented each other so well. And the Terran would kind of build bunkers outside the Protoss base and just kill them. But we've seen a resurgence of a similar sort of play in Legacy of the Void, even though this is an expansion where one base play and such fast, cheesy attacks are much rarer. But in Korea, these have been just destroying. We haven't seen them a lot in the foreign meta. That being said, there's not a lot of Terrans in the foreign meta. So it's something where it's been interesting recently where I've been like, okay, first of all, how do you defend this? I did a daily earlier this week talking about a few things you need to prioritize and change up as the Protoss player in order to defend. I'll talk about the key ones of that later. But today, I want to talk about it from the Terran perspective. First of all, for you Terran guys, I'm going to give you a very easy walkthrough of Maru's disgusting build, his version of it, which we might as well start taking a look at right away. This is just me executing it at pleb level, not pleb level, but a high master's level, after practicing it a whole bunch. But essentially, I'm just going to give you a walkthrough of how Maru does this build, and then I'm going to be talking about some other things as well. So it is going to be a barracks gas opening. And those other things I'm going to talk about, they're going to be why do the Koreans keep losing to it? Why is this stuff so strong in the Korean meta right now? What are the Protoss players there doing differently to the Koreans outside, to the Protoss players outside of Korea? I just automatically think of every single Protoss player as a Korean because they're that intimidating. So let's walk you guys through the build to start out. Now this is Maru's variation. Keep in mind there's so many variations. I've seen Maru do different variations, but I've seen him do this one both in July against Hush, and he's also done it in Kesper Cup against Classic. One game on Frozen Temple, one game on Galactic Process, identical builds. And it worked in both games. One game where it was scouted, one game where it wasn't scouted. So it's definitely one of the ones which he's kind of still doing at the current moment. There's other versions of this 111 where you rush Cyclones out. There's another one which isn't even really a 111. It's just a 2-factory Cyclone Mine Rush, which Innovation did and works in a very similar way. And there's also ones where TY, for instance, recently did one on Gettysburg where he just opens up with a very fast Marine tank medevac into Liberator and Cyclone push. It's like really, there's a bunch of slightly different reorderings, but essentially it's always the same sort of, I'm going to kill you on one base. This is super all in. So you start out with that barracks, gas, immediately into second gas. You then go straight for factory the second that barracks finishes. After one Marine, you then start a reactor. You build your second depot. And then as soon as the factory finishes, you build a starport. Now, you could build the tech lab straight away on this factory if you want, but Widow Mine first is usually the better way to do it. So you can use that Widow Mine for defense in case your opponent's doing something crazy. Most of the time, Maru doesn't necessarily scout too much with this build. He sometimes does scout to check what's going on, but usually the generic execution of it is going to be pretty solid. So just going double Marine production, builds the one Widow Mine, and then straight into the tech lab on the factory. You then want to be building a medevac immediately out of that starport. Pick up those 6 Marines in that mine and rally those across the map. You're just adding depots constantly behind this, of course. And then you're building a Liberator immediately. You pull 4 SCVs, which are on auto repair. You just rally your Marines, that tank, and now Cyclone production, and just constant Liberators across the map. You unload outside their base, and this is where the action starts. So this is a good point to benchmark the build when you're first learning it. Always figure out, okay, when are you first hitting? Looking at Maru's games, he was hitting at like 3 minutes 45 right in front of the natural. I'm about 5 seconds behind Maru's timing here. You can see it's 3 minutes 50, and I'm unloading just a little bit further back from the natural. Maru was all the way up here, almost fully unloaded 6 seconds earlier than me. So he was, 5 to 10 seconds faster. But 3 minutes 45 is the aspirational benchmark. If you're fully unloaded outside their base at 3 minutes 50, then that's okay. Now, because I'm a pleb, I'm going to mis-execute this a bit, and oh, he's got an observer. Snipes down the first Widow Mine. That's a really big loss. And he was just insanely well prepared for this, partly because I just did it to him 8 games in a row. By the way, big shout out to Gemini for helping me practice this out. You might know him from All Things Protoss. Really good GM slash High Master Protoss player. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to start building bunkers. Normally you'd burrow your mine right next to that, and you just kind of chill here. And you're like, yeah, I'm going to siege you up. You siege your tank up. I could have sieged that further back and used the medevac to bring it forward if I wanted to. And the important thing is just always to keep that tank alive. Because he's super well prepared for this, he pulls some probes to stop that bunker getting up. This actually gets quite awkward for me. And it kind of seems like it's being held. In a lot of Maru's games, it definitely isn't this messy. Sometimes, well, actually a lot of them it is this messy, but he usually wins a little bit more decisively with the first couple of engages in terms of pushing into the natural. As it is, Gemini kind of throws a little bit here, because he keeps just walking into tank fire. But, keep in mind, he just practiced against this 7 times in a row, so he's kind of well prepared for the situation that's coming his way. But you can see here, you just keep the Liberator set up as a sort of safety zone they can't engage into, and you just keep dancing the tanks and cyclones around and just abusing that superior range. Normally, it's just 1 siege tank pretty much for life. Every now and then, though, after 2 cyclones, Maru will add another siege tank, so it's a little bit up to preference. But normally, it's Widowmine, tank, 2 cyclones, and then if you want to add more tanks, maybe, but usually just keep cyclone production up. And you just want to keep edging these bunkers forward as much as possible, keep picking away at these units, and you can see just how irritating this is for the Protoss player to deal with. Like, if you just micro units, you don't really need to macro at home. Every now and then you just cycle through your production. You're like, build 2 Marines, build a cyclone, build a Liberator. I should be dropping a depot as well, but if you're losing enough units, you don't even need to do that. And you can see here, as long as you don't let these tanks get focused down, you are feeling really good. I think I actually will get a tank focused down in the next fight. Let's see how bad my micro is. So just moving these lib zones forward. I've got a bunker up. I've got the cyclone that wants to edge forward. Here we go. Yeah, I accidentally let that tank get focused down there, but he loses almost all his units for it. He's like panicking a little bit. He was up at 3 AM doing this, by the way, after studying all night. So massive shout out to Gemini for actually playing as well as he did. And eventually I shove in. So a lot of the time your opponent will make a mistake, even if they hold the first wave and they'll die to the follow-up. It's a very powerful push. It can work very well. And as you edge in, if they don't have enough anti-air to deal with the libs and stuff, once you get set up like with something like this, it starts to be almost impossible for Protoss to break unless they've got like stalkers on the outside and they've got blink or something crazy like that, which they shouldn't have had time to get. And there we go, Protoss dies. Alright guys, so that's a very simple build order. It's really not that hard to execute. I just realized rather than swapping overlay, I keep just showing my screen capture, which is a really dodgy way of showing the in-game. So sorry about that, guys. So really simple build order. The notes are going to be, if you click down below in the description on YouTube, it'll open up the thread, go to the last page of the thread, there'll be the post for this build, and voila, there'll be my build notes. It's a very simple build order though, it's just the order I went through there. The execution and the micro of it takes a lot of refinement. Getting the timing down exact takes a bit of refinement. So I want to keep this daily short, as I'm not sure if I mentioned that, but I do. So that's the first part. Here's how you do a cheese, Terrans. Enjoy the dirty, cheesy builds that you can do. Get your TVP win rate up. Now let's talk about why the hell do Koreans keep dying to this? Why are foreign Terrans not doing it as much? And that partly comes down to the metagame. It comes down to a few different things. So let's take a look at a few snippets. Now these are all going to be from Pro League and Kesper Cup. So big shout out to both Spo TV and the Esports TV YouTube channel, as well as Kesper, who are the owners of this content. I'm just going to be showing little snippets here and there to identify a few things which keep happening in Korea. Now keep in mind, guys, by the way, first thing I need to think about is, why does this keep working? Well, what time does it hit? 3 minutes 45 was when the first Widowmine drop hits on that close map. If it's on Galactic Process where Maru does that, he ends up not actually hitting and unloading that medevac until a little bit later. We see here on Galactic Process the exact same build. Oops. He's just unloaded and he's burrowing his mine at 3 minutes 59. So he's about 15 seconds later because this is a bigger map. So depending on the map size, there's a variation of an extra 10 or 15 seconds. But generally with this version, it hits about 3:45. Let's take a look at some of the other versions. Let's see, what timing do they hit? Now, there's the innovation cheese where he hits with cyclones and mines.
important tech for Protoss against.
Jesus, I forgot to mute all these VODs. That's cool. In this build, the first Cyclone is coming across the map. Actually, I wrote this down already. I just realized on the Pro League VOD, I can't show you guys the exact game time. You have to trust my maths. The way you figure out game timer on Pro League VODs, guys, is you figure out the exact moment of the start of the game, and then you just calculate the difference between where you're up to in the YouTube time and when the game started. So with this, you can see that 8:55 is when that started. The Cyclone first arrived, so that's when the pressure first starts and the mistakes can start happening. And the game first started back at 5:45. So with a Cyclone, it's about 3 minutes and 15 seconds when that first Cyclone arrives and starts being a pain in the butt. So with that one, there's a little bit more pressure. There's a few more chances to throw your opponent off. Okay, cool, fair enough. Generally speaking, though, you're not going to hit with a really serious pressure like those 6 Marines in the mine until 3:45. Let's check the third type, which is also very common. And let's check exactly when TY hits, when he does his one where he just goes straight into the tank evac, skips the mine drop and does that. What timing is he actually getting over to the base of the opponent? Let's check it out. Zooming in here, we see that he's gearing up for his push, and it is about... Now, it should be hitting here on Gettysburg, where he's proxied on the low ground, and he's actually blocked scouting with a depot down there as well. It should be hitting right about now, or about 3 minutes 40, at latest 3 minutes 45 outside the opponent's natural. The reason it got really delayed here is TY made a few really silly errors, trapped at this cute pylon block. And what TY kept doing with his Marines is he kept clicking into the enemy natural, and his Marines kept turning around and trying to go north on 3 separate occasions, which ended up wasting about 20 seconds of his attack time, about 15 seconds. So by the time he ends up finally breaking down the pylon and getting over there, it's actually quite delayed, but you've got to remember that normally he could be here probably about 15 seconds faster. So he could be down here at 3:45, maybe 3 minutes 40 at the earliest, with 7 Marines, a tank, and a medevac. So that is when these pushes start to ramp up. By the time bunkers get set up, liberators join, and all of that sort of stuff, it's normally about 4 minutes 15, 4 minutes 20, at latest 4 minutes 25. So usually before the Terran gets that kind of broken setup of all the units complementing each other, he's got a tank which can be maneuvered with the medevac, he's got a liberator zoning. It's always going to be this small window before that where it really is the Protoss' job to dislodge the Terran player, and that's where they need to make it work. However, in all of these games, the Protoss players lose. Every single one. This is what I was talking about. The only game where the Protoss player holds is Trust against Innovation in that Cyclone game, and that is specifically because he knew exactly what build was coming, and he metagamed the crap out of it and got a Prism out at like 3 minutes into the game. It was like a really weird reaction. I'll talk about that a little bit later. So why aren't these players ready at all with the units? Why, when I was doing my episode earlier in the week, looking at the way Drogo was doing it, why did he have 7 gateway units out at about 4 minutes? I think it was 4 minutes 15. I'll double check the VOD now just to check that. So let's check that. I'll show you guys straight away. So let's look at when Drogo engages. Okay, so we're about to see Drogo engage with his first warp in of units. 4 minutes 15. He's just done his first warp in of 3 Stalkers. He's already got 3 Stalkers and an Adept. This is from my own VOD. And he's got an Immortal that's just popped out and is making its way down, by the way. So you see here, 4 minutes 25. Now this is an older execution where Massa hits a little bit later with the rush. And you can see, there we go, he does break out. Okay. So in terms of when that rush started, if we go back to 3 minutes 45 in this VOD, we can see that Massa hadn't really started the pressure. At this point, he wasn't putting that on. Would Drogo crumble if there was a bit more pressure? Would he still get those units out in time? I think he probably would with his specific reaction, because it is just so tailored to be exceptionally safe. What I ended up talking about in that previous daily, where I was talking about how you defend this, is a few key things that Drogo does to defend, and how that's one of the most important things. The key one is skipping his mothership core until later, because it's just not that important, because Cyclones and tanks are never going to go in range of it, Marines aren't going to go in range of it. This is a sort of siege up push. All a mothership core does is buy a little bit of time. The problem is if you give the Terran time to build bunkers, you're screwed. So Mothership core is the first thing that needs to go out the window. The second thing is making sure you get a robo very fast, build an observer, and then an immortal. The third thing is getting out your 2 extra gateways very quickly so that you can do a very fast warp in. And this is where chrono boost becomes very important, but not just chrono boost, also cutting probes. And this is something which, looking through the VODs, and it's very hard without replays to identify 100%, but none of the Korean players are cutting probes at all. They know they don't know it's a one base all in, or sometimes they do know it's a one base all in, but they just don't take it seriously enough, and they're not cutting workers. And as a result, they just don't have their gateways in time, and their warp ins are coming too late. They're not able to break it before it gets out of control. So the first reason this happens, and I'm going to go through these things now. So, whoops. Okay. Sorry, I'm a little bit disorganized in how I present this. Number one, they're not scouting. A lot of Protoss players at the moment are scouting only after their Nexus goes down in the current meta. Whereas in the foreign scene, a lot of players are scouting after their gateway, quite a lot earlier than that. So as a result, we've seen many, many, many games where the players are trying to scout, they're coming in, the Marine's already out, they're rejected, and they can't figure out if it's just a gas first opening, is there just a delayed command center, is this a double gas, how all in is the Terran player? And as a result, they're trying to play a little bit too middle of the road in response to it. They're building a very fast mothership core, and it's really not helping them out. Let's look at a few examples of this in some games. Whoops. So here's Maru versus Hush. This is the exact build that I just did. Hush, only after putting his Nexus down, is going to head across the map with this probe. He's going to get there right about now as this Marine comes out, and he's going to be like, hey, what's up? All he manages to see is the lack of a natural, and I don't think he even got to see the lack of a natural there. And this is just one of those things where it's like, well, the natural could be about to go down, so he's got to try and go around and try to get some scouting, but it's really hard for him to verify exactly what's going on. We see here, Maru chases that probe off and is really good at zoning it out. Any sort of scouting information isn't going to come for quite a while. He's so desperate to get that info. Is Maru watching? Maru is watching, but I think it does actually get past in this scenario. Oh, all he sees is the lack of a natural, but he still doesn't know if there's a CC in the high ground. And whatever the case, whatever his read is off that information, I can't read minds. He builds a mothership core, which is not what you need to hang on against these pushes. Any sort of one base push, you do not need a mothership core. The very few games where Protoss players win, they always delay that, including Trust versus Innovation. He delays the mothership core. And he actually cuts probes ever so slightly to get his 2 gateways down, which is what you need to do to make sure they're on time. But even though he chronos out some Stalkers, he's only got 2 Stalkers by the time this push comes. And that's just going to make it very awkward and uncomfortable to deal with this. His Observer seems very late, so he can't snipe down this Widow Mine, whereas otherwise he would have been able to get the Widow Mine there very likely, and that's because he built the Mothership core first. Even though he gets a 3 Stalker warp in here, he ends up here. Let's look at this. He's got 3 Stalkers, 5 Stalkers, and a Mothership core. Nope, 6 Stalkers. Okay, not bad. However, the difference remains. Drogo here had an Adept as well and an Immortal coming down to join the fight at the same time. Let's be super anal and double check that I'm not comparing players of different skill levels with different executions. Let's double check the timing. What timing in this replay is this game? Let's check it. Right now it is 10:50 in VOD time when the fighting starts, when he has the warp in and the bunkers are all kind of getting up and stuff. Let's go back to when this game starts and let's calculate exactly when that is. So that was 10 minutes 50 and the game starts at 6:45. So that's 4 minutes and 10 seconds into the game. Remember, Drogo had the Immortal coming just out, and he had those 7 gateway units at 4 minutes 15. So similar timings in terms of the gateway units, but Drogo, because he cut probes, because he chrono boosted his warp gate research a little bit more, when he engaged, he had just the 1 extra gateway unit. He had the Immortal on the way out, and that made such a big difference, as did the decisiveness of when he pushed out. If we rewatch this fight one more time in terms of how Hush tries to defend here, let's take a look at it. Tries to focus down the mine, fails at first, finally gets it. Tank sets up, he takes 1 siege tank shot. He's now building a warp prism, which I don't think is important to defend this. And then he just kind of goes, oh, I think that's too many units, I can't fight this. He comes forward, loses a pylon. He's taking a little bit more damage on his Stalkers, not a crazy amount. and the Liberator's now set up and the bunkers are there. He's missed his timing. He's missed that window where Drogo engaged with the Immortal, and also we saw every time the players won, whether it was Drogo, whether it was Harstem against Beyond, they always pulled probes in that window before bunkers finished, before the Liberator shows up, before the Terran really gets that position cemented. Hush here failed to do that. He starts to try and engage a little bit, but he ends up just kind of getting pushed back, and he just ends up kind of abandoning the base and trying to build up in his main, and he eventually breaks out, but he's too far behind at that point, and Maru just does too much damage with his siege tank. A Liberator sieges up his main mineral line at the same time. This is like the funniest Liberator siege up. He's like, oh wait, all your units are down there, man. Sieges up, kills like 6 probes, and then gets the Liberator out of there. That's sick. So that's essentially the main things. If we look through at Trap's game, let's double check Trap's game, guys. Why did these players keep losing to this? Once again, this was another game where I believe Trap didn't scout. Let's double check. So Trap's coming across the map. Whoops. He's got a probe there that's going across a little bit. And he's just kind of chilling on the bridge, just looking for anything, and he puts a pylon down. Trap doesn't actually scout in that early game. If we go back to the very early stages, you can see, wait, where does he? Oh no, he does scout. Oh yeah, Trap does scout. He just does a really weird reaction. So Trap scouts with a probe, and then he goes really fast 2 gates because he's opened up Nexus first. So this was this game was actually really hard for Trap because he's gone Nexus first against this build. So that replay is a little bit iffy. That's probably not the best example. But Maru vs. Classic is a very interesting one on Galactic as well, because Classic sees everything in the early stages. Check out this one. He comes across with a very early probe scout, sees the barracks, sees the double gas in the main, hangs around, sees the factory go down instantly. He'll see that in just a moment. And then he tries to go Stargate and tries to go kind of Adept Phoenix Oracle. And you'll notice here, Classic's starting to make some of the clever adjustments that are needed to defend this. So if you watch, he delays the mothership core because it's not important and starts just chrono boosting units straight away. Goes straight for a Stargate. Now that's a very odd decision rather than a robo. It can work, but he does go for that. And I think that the really big problem here for Classic was a really stupid error. And basically he went full foreigner. So this is kind of funny because this is this is something which is such a huge mistake. This is unforgivable. Check this out. I was watching this VOD and I could not understand how he scouted it and still died. I was like, what the hell went wrong this game? And I looked at the timings, and his first warp in was at like 4 minutes 40 or 4 minutes 45. And I was like, what the shit? That's like over 30 seconds late. Like, what is going on right now? So check this out. Warp Gate, Cybercore finishes, starts an Adept, doesn't start Warp Gate research. So that's 2 minutes 15 in the replay, or 2 minutes 10. 2 minutes 40, still hasn't started Warp Gate research. And he starts it at 2 minutes 45. 35-second delay on starting his Warp Gate research. He doesn't have his first warp in ready. I really would have loved to see him use this mixture of Phoenix and Oracles to win against this push with like a really nice decisive push out timing, because it looked like things were going well. And I couldn't understand why he lost until I was like, wait, why is that warp in just so damn late? Classic unfortunately made a really silly error. So even though he did some great work this game, notice he builds an Oracle and he actually comes down, if we zoom up, he intercepts the move out, dodges the Cyclone and the Marines, and kills every single SCV coming across the map, so there's no bunkers or repair. If he also was able to warp in 3 more Adepts or 3 Stalkers and start engaging on the front, I think, especially with 1 or 2 Phoenix lifts on, say, Cyclones or tanks, like he could have destroyed this push potentially, and that would have been, absolutely sick. Just to clarify, by the way, guys, I know there's going to be some people who are like, you said this was the exact same build as Frozen Temple, but he's building Cyclones and Magfield rather than Siege Tanks. You're a liar, pig. He scouted the Stargate. This is why, Maru does scout some games. If he scouts a Stargate opening, then he will go for Magfield and Cyclones first, because otherwise you're trying to fight Oracles with like 6 or 7 Marines, and that's never a good idea. So keep in mind, guys, if you do scout with this 1-1-1 rush as a Terran player, make sure you react to the Stargate by going Cyclones first. Stargate's still a little bit awkward against it for the Protoss player, but yeah, it works out. So just looking at the timings, I think the biggest problem I've seen in multiple games is players scouting only after Nexus and not seeing that it is double gas and just being denied by a Marine. So the Protoss player just builds a Mothership core, his Robo's too late, the Immortal is just way too late to the fight, the Observer's too late to kill the Widow Mine in the first pressure, so the first pressure does some damage to the gateway units as well, sometimes even kills a pylon. Beyond that, when it comes to the actual timing push, there's a mixture of people either not cutting probes to get their warp gates down on time, forgetting to upgrade warp gate, not putting any chrono into warp gate, whereas Drogo, of course, had a good method of chronoing the warp gate up until his robo finishes and then swapping the chrono into that while constantly chronoing the gateway. And I also didn't see a single Korean player get 4 gateway units out before warp gate finished, whereas Drogo, with his specific response there, it looked so safe. And Drogo was the one guy who very consciously was happy to cut a couple workers in order to get those gateways down on time, get the robo building on time. Because when you're on 2 bases and you're often on about 40 probes versus about 20 SCVs to 25 SCVs from the Terran, there's no pressure for you to keep building economy. Sacrifice a few more probes, have 1 or 2 more units out by the time they're coming in, and that's going to give you such a more powerful window to engage before those bunkers finish, before those liberators finish. So within this daily, I've told you how to do a dirty cheese, and I've also told you how to absolutely crush the dirty cheese in an earlier daily this week. So this is one of the few times I show you guys a little cheese build, and I don't feel as bad talking about it. So that about sums up today's session. After studying so many VODs and really kind of scratching my head as to what's going on in these games, number 1, Nexus first is part of the reason why this is strong in the Korean meta. Number 2, players are scouting really late, so they're not always verifying what's going on. Number 3, a few silly mistakes and also a few bad decisions from players. Players prioritizing the Mothership core too much, not getting the robo fast enough, and not being decisive enough with their engage timing. In that Hush game, maybe if he just engaged by pulling the probes, even without the Immortal on the 7th Gateway unit, I think he probably could have broken that push from Marrow and Frozen Temple, but he was too indecisive, and so he didn't manage to take the engagement. All right, guys, going to answer a few questions if there's any there in chat before I do continue. Logic says, do you have time for replay coaching in a few hours or in a few hours? No, email me. Email me if you want to do coaching. Questions to do with the episode. Why would anyone use 1-1-1 over 7 racks? Okay, I think that's the only question. That's cool. This was a pretty straightforward episode. Like, there really aren't that many questions. Obviously, 7 racks is amazing, and you want to do that if you want to channel the spirit of Wings of Liberty beta TLO, but otherwise you can skip on it and maybe do a 1-1-1. Hoopsaya says, Pig, is scouting on your first pylon a good idea to be able to see the double gas and make adjustments? Scouting after your gateway on 2-player maps is fine. On 4-player maps, if you scout after pylon, you're going to get the vision unless you scout them in the last possible location. So that's the rule I follow, Hoopsaya, as a Protoss, is I scout after pylon on 4-player maps, after gateway on 2-player maps, and that's going to give you all the information that you need. And you can be a little bit annoying with the probe as well. All right, guys, thank you so much for hanging out. I do really appreciate the support. Couldn't this 1-1-1 be strong against Zergs is a question? No. You can do it against Terran. You absolutely can, though the struggle for high ground vision if they get a tank and a Viking out is very hard. But against Zergs, the problem is they can just build speedlings and overwhelm it. You don't have enough anti-Zergling in there because they're unupgraded Marines. If your opponent skips Zergling speed, oh, hells yeah, you could definitely make something like this work. It could be really sick. There are some pushes like this that kind of work against some Zerg players, but it kind of relies on them not reacting hard enough. Like, it can work up to a pretty high level, don't get me wrong, doing 1-base tank liberator Marine pushes. But yeah, just refine it and remember that if you play a Zerg who reacts properly, he will crush it, but you could make it work. Anyway, guys, that's enough for now. I'm going to finish up the VOD for you guys on YouTube. Don't forget to hug a watermelon, kick a walrus, and of course, punch a cactus to the moon. I'll catch you guys next time. Goodbye and good night.